The U.S. is ready to destroy Syrian air forces with 3 ships and 24 planes. The U.S. is able to destroy the Syrian air forces with the help of only 3 warships and 24 drones, a member of the U.S. Institute for the Study of War says this will prevent Syrian air forces from being used against civilians and the rebels. According to the expert, a limited strike will disable the Syrian air forces, while a large-scale operation will guarantee that the forces will not recover from the strike. The expert also believes that the Syrian missile defense system is no threat to such an operation, as the U.S. equipment is much more precise. This means that there is no necessity to destroy the Syrian missile shield, he explains. So, on the one website they said, what hubris, right? Arrogance, the empire, right? 3 Syrias, civil war leading to a breakup. So I've been seeing this in another article too. This is how the mainstream media is covering it. Syria is now 3 countries. As a distinct single entity, Syria has ceased to exist, says analysts. Analysts are the think tanks and these policies for regime change, basically. But it says here that Syria, as it exists on a map today, only dates back to the end of World War I and the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, yet increasingly the map version of Syria is just a memory of the civil war dividing the country into 3 distinct entities. So, like I said before, they call it a civil war. Fighting in Homs province is chasing Sunni supporters of the rebels northward into rebel-held areas, while rebel offenses in Latakia are driving the nation's Alawite minority south into the area around Damascus. Even as the fight escalates, the rebel north is seeing growing fighting with Kurdish militias, which are trying to carve out a 3rd Kurdish entity in the northeast. In many ways, this new era of 3 Syrias all fighting one another reflects divisions that existed 1,000 years ago in the area. At the time, the region around Damascus, which is now Assad government territory, was the northern extent of this Fatimid Salafate Shiite empire. The rest of modern Syria at the time had fallen under the sway of this Seljuk Sultanate and was dominated by the Sunnis, though today's 3rd region, Syrian Kurdistan, did not exist entirely independently at the time. But the Marwanids, a Kurdish dynasty, were forever trying to carve out relative autonomy in the region. Something that I noticed with this, and this is antiwar.com, which is a pretty good website, but kind of like the way this mainstream media is covering as well as alternative media, is that this is something that just happened out of peaceful protest and activists and opposition, and this is the will of the people. Well, this is the thing. I hate to say it, but it's not the will of the Syrian people. These people are not even from Syria. They're trying to undo something that has already taken place. You can imagine if Russia funded the indigenous or Native Americans to basically create like an 1850 type country where you had like the Union in the north and the Confederates in the south, and you had indigenous populations scattered around, especially west of the Mississippi, and they did that purposely and created flown in Cubans and Haitians and South Americans and Canadians and all these indigenous people and different foreigners into the United States, imported them, armed them, trained them, radicalized them, and destabilized the United States in order to create this and go back in time. I mean, this is insane. I'm not saying that the indigenous, deserved what they had, but you know how hard it is to go back and undo things? I mean, sometimes it would be nice if, could undo all the crap that was done by people and groups before, basically the powers that be, what they did before. Now this is the powers that be undoing, like in Iraq, creating that what they did in there, Libya, Afghanistan, what they're probably going to do to Pakistan. They balkanized places. This is all talked about by people like, say, Big Brzezinski, balkanization. I mean, they created these huge states, forced them together under autocrats, supported them, stole their resources for the cheap, sucked them dry, and now all of a sudden they're going to balkanize them and turn them all against each other. So even though they just learned to live with it and they're in relative peace, you have idiots like this who say, couldn't have happened to a more deserving government. Hopefully this will be the beginning of the end of all dictators over there, including Putin, because they actually believe they live in a free and democratic country. Because that's what they're being told. We're going over there and bombing, killing people to force democracy on them. This is my website, Global Government News, and the domain is ggnonline.net. Alright, I'm going to keep moving here. The next one I have is clashes in western Syrian mountains kill over 30. Rebels attack several Alawite villages. A new round of fighting in Latakia province of Syria has left at least 31 people, including 12 rebels and 19 fighters loyal to the Assad government. Latakia seems like it may be the one of the next battleground provinces, as the military has retaken territory around Homs and may look to press forward or toward the coast as well as Aleppo. Over 665,000 Syrian refugees are in Lebanon. The number of these refugees from Syria and Lebanon has exceeded 665,000, with a surge about 20,000 compared to last week's estimate, the UN Refugee Agency said. So I pointed out the influx of Syrian refugees is still high and that 70% of them are women and children. I wonder what the United Nations is going to say about this, because this is what they like. This is what the global government wants. They want refugees to be displaced from these places, because a lot of them are going to end up here in the United States and in Europe. So, and then people will, of course, say, you know, they'll basically fall into the Zionist trap of Islamophobia. And basically, like I said, these people, their resources were taken, their governments were their nations were destabilized, and they have nowhere else to go, because they've unleashed the terrorists against them. 120 children slaughtered in Syria's Tal Abyad. So terrorists affiliated to the Al-Nusra Front have massacred 120 children, 330 men and women, Syria's northern district. Militants kill 450 Kurdish civilians in northern Syria. Kind of another story here. Foreign-backed militants fighting against the Syrian government have killed 450 civilians. The massacre comes a week after al-Nusra militants attacked 2 Kurdish villages in Aleppo and took around 200 civilians hostage. So, fighting between the Kurdish militia and al-Qaeda-linked groups has been escalating in the north and northeastern Syria in the past weeks after Kurdish fighters who are opposed to foreign interference in Syria managed to push back militants from several positions in the area. On July 30th, a powerful Kurdish militia said it was mobilizing against al-Qaeda-linked militants in northeastern Syria after a Kurdish opposition leader was killed or assassinated. So, like I mentioned before, it's a good time to mention it that Lee Kaplan, I believe his name is, he's a staunch Zionist, and he was saying on Press TV, he kept trying to mention or push, before all this Kurdistan, before the Kurds were taken hostage, before 400 of them were killed, he was talking about an autonomous Kurdish region. We need to look at the Kurdish, what's going on with the Kurds, and support them. And that right there was a big red flag for me that went up, which is that was a Zionist plan. That was a Zionist plan, and that video came out at least 2 weeks ago. So he said that on basically just days or hours before this whole thing kicked off. This has been a very successful operation by the Zionists to bring in the Kurds and create that. That could have been the final nail in the coffin for Syria and Assad's government. These are the people that the West is supporting, these democratic nations, people like this, who the Syrian rebel commander who's eating organs on TV, right? U.S. President Obama received a Nobel Peace Prize, and this is the type of people, they receive peace prizes for supporting people that eat organs and kill women and children. Syrian Defense Minister tours Homs. He said Syria will triumph over the coward terrorist, which is supported by more than 80 countries, adding that this terror is aimed at carrying out the U.S. Zionist plot in the region. French security reporting that Assad will remain in power for long years, or basically many years to come. They say that he can do this because Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah professional fighters are backing him, according to the French report. Assad says terror should only be stricken with an iron fist. No solution can be reached with terror except by striking it with an iron fist. I don't think that any sane human being would think that terrorism can be dealt with politics. There may be a role for politics in dealing with terrorism preemptively, adding that as soon as terrorism has arisen, it can only be struck out. It's an interesting quote. He said, "It is true that there's a battle being fought in the media and on the internet, but the crisis will only be solved on the battlefield." And not much of a surprise, he accused the coalition or the rebels or the opposition basically of being on the payroll of more than one Gulf country. He's talking about Qatar and Saudi Arabia, blaming, and of course the blaming of the Syrian state for terrorism rather than the blaming of these armed men. New Iranian president vows support for Assad during a meeting with the Syrian Prime Minister. Rouhani says deep strategic and historic ties between the people of Syria and Iran will not be shaken by any force in the world. Al-Qaeda assassinates intelligence officer in central Yemen. So Al-Qaeda gunman on a motorbike shot dead an intelligence officer in Yemen's central province on Sunday evening. The attackers left a leaflet near the body of the dead officer saying it was in revenge for the recent U.S. drone strikes. Tunisia police fire shots into the air to disperse protesters, says witnesses. The security forces also used tear gas on Monday to break up demonstrators who were protesting against the Tunisia government. The violence erupted after angry protesters tried to prevent the governor from entering the town hall. The secular Etakatul party said the ruling Ennahda-led coalition to step down due to tensions following the killing of this Mohamed Brahmi, left-wing popular movement party. Tunisia's Ennahda chief says ready for referendum. The head of Tunisia's ruling Ennahda party has announced readiness to hold a referendum on transitional government in the African country. Also, we have Egypt. Amid rising threats, Al said Egypt's government supporters may scrap protests. So the junta to charge protest leaders with incitement. Warnings from Egypt's military that their patience is running out with public protests by supporters of the ousted civilian government seem to have their desired effect, with signs that the remaining protest leaders are prepared to give in. Again, talking about these two major massacres of civilian protesters, where was the UN crying out? Where was the UN crying out, mentioning these atrocities? Egypt Army, government to compromise with Muslim Brotherhood. The Egyptian military and government are set to compromise with the Muslim Brotherhood in an attempt to put an end to the political crisis in the country, a top military source says. Could be, too, that the globalists, basically, we're talking about Zionists, that they're getting what they want in Syria right now, so they're going to, and like I said before, I think a lot of that would happen in Egypt. The analysis of Morzai had to do with Syria, that he wasn't clamping down enough. So maybe they're just willing to just let that go or put it on ice until further notice. It's like they say, in order to create change in one area, you just create destabilization around that area, create change around that area. U.S. diplomat kills man in car crash and leaves Kenya. The American diplomat, who police say was speeding across the center line, the SUV, and rammed into a full minibus, killing a father of three whose widow is 6 months pregnant. Embassy officials in Nairobi rushed the American and his family out of Kenya the next day, leaving the crash victims with no financial assistance to pay for the funeral and hospital bills for 8. So it says here, or so the others who were seriously injured. Obama meets security advisors over the most specific, credible terrorist threat in years, and U.S. forces are on alert, so better be in fear. So when they're talking about a potential threat occurring or emanating from the Arabian Peninsula, a lot of times they're talking about Yemen. Yeah, look at this. August 3rd, developing. American forces are pre-positioned and ready to deal with the latest al-Qaeda threat. So does this have to do with Syria, the whole thing? U.S. terror alert political stunt, says James Fetzer. So, but if it's not a cover for actual mobilization of troops for basically Arabia and the Arabian Peninsula, it could be this, a PsyOp. Well, it's ridiculous. It appears to be another psychological political stunt to intimidate the American people and make them believe that there is a real terrorist threat from abroad. Of course, the obvious is, well, if the United States cared about foreign terrorists, they would stop arming them, right? And funding them in Syria and other places. Clashes between army militants killed 35 in northern Nigeria. 35 people were killed in clashes between the army and militants in north of the country. And to Mali, you just had China deploying some troops there. Mali Tuaregs for the UN, that is. Mali Tuaregs threaten fresh uprising if no deal on autonomy. The rebels will fight Mali's newly elected rulers if no negotiated solution is reached to grant their northern homeland autonomy, they say. They help the French, oust the other terrorists. We will continue our struggle democratically, but we will take up arms again if we have to, they say. It says, go figure, Mugabe wins in Zimbabwe. 89-year-old wins another term. It says here in the AP, they've already called the vote a farce and a promise to challenge the results in court. And even to Asia, you have Prime Minister saying U.S. threatened Pakistan over Iran gas pipeline. Pakistan needs pipeline for energy shortage. Sharif reported today that he was threatened with U.S. sanctions by Kerry when he visited if he dared to allow the pipeline to complete. Chinese military hardware hitting Russia for joint anti-terror drills. Less than a month after joint naval drills, the largest that China has participated. Russia warships are docking in Cuba on a friendly visit. Nicaragua is purchasing Russian gunboats for its waters, and it has Costa Rica concerned. New Russian missile boat starts Caspian trials. Sri Lanka port secures China supply routes. China being more aggressive with India, they're stopping the Indian army from patrolling in its own territory. Thank you.